Whoa. I think I just figured something out, Beavis.
What?
This sucks.
Yeah, it really sucks.
This sucks more than anything that has ever sucked before.
The Order of Chaos, Chapter 3, Why Everything Sucks. I was sitting in the living room with my fiancée, Chelsea, watching the news on YouTube. She passed me the joint we were smoking together and said, "Why does existence have to suck so much?" And maybe it was just the copious excess of THC rattling around in my brain, or maybe it was the fact that I never emotionally matured beyond the age of 15. But for whatever reason, her question struck me as the most profound philosophical investigation I'd ever been invited to undertake. Most of the supposedly profound questions that philosophers and self-styled deep thinkers like to toss around really don't pack much of a punch, do they? Why are we here? No reason. What's the meaning of life? There isn't one. Is there a God? No. Free will or determinism? Who cares? But my beautiful and wise fiancée, Chelsea Stanton, the most effortlessly rebellious person I've ever met, finally posed to me a question that I didn't readily have the answer to and couldn't easily dismiss as irrelevant. Why does everything have to suck so much? I mean, leaders suck, TV shows suck, movies suck, school sucks, work sucks, pets suck, cars suck, etc. Every facet of life sucks in some way, according to someone. Even something everybody loves, like ice cream, can suck. You can get an ice cream headache. It's full of sugar and calories that make you fat. The milk used to make it is exploitative to cows. If you eat too much of it, which is easy to do, you can get a stomach ache. You can't always have it when you want it because you're on a diet or because you have a toothache, and the cold ice cream will make it worse. Some people are lactose intolerant and can't have it at all unless they eat a special lactose-free version that I presume tastes like garbage. Some things really, really, really suck on a whole other level, like losing a loved one, or having a severe illness, or being horribly disfigured in an accident, or getting raped, or being trapped in poverty, or being at war, or being homeless, or being addicted to drugs, or going to prison, or suffering the mental and physical decline associated with aging, or falling out with a family member, or formerly close friend, or 1,001 other tragedies that are known to kick the human psyche in the teeth with alarming regularity. From stubbing your toe to genocide, from a mosquito bite to a nuclear war, from being bored in class to being ripped apart by wolves while your family watches in stunned terror, from the insignificant, trifling annoyances to the monumental, life-shattering tragedies. The evidence is ample that existence is indeed jam-packed with suck. Despite this fact, whenever I've publicly expressed the idea that life sucks, I am invariably accosted by starry-eyed optimists, read miserable fucks in denial, who want to let me know that life doesn't suck. Why? I tune them out for the most part, but it usually boils down to, because mountains are pretty and puppy dogs have waggly tails. The problem, they suggest, is not that life sucks. The problem is that my attitude sucks. This propensity for optimism and for finding the silver lining of even the darkest storm clouds has certainly served its purpose in human society. For example, I recently read the account of a Jewish woman at a concentration camp, Auschwitz, where she used humor to keep her spirits up during a terrible time. When they cut our hair at Auschwitz, that was something terrible. After they cut my hair off, suddenly I saw some girlfriends of mine that I've known for a very long time. Many cried. They cried after long hair, and then I started laughing. And they asked, "What, are you out of your mind? What are you laughing about?" I said, "This I never had before. A hairdo for free? Never in my whole life." And I still remember they looked at me as if I was crazy. This brave woman was not the only Jew during the Holocaust to use humor to diffuse the darkness of the times. There were many plays written and performed by Jews in the 1,000-plus Jewish ghettos like Warsaw during the time of Jewish persecution by the Nazis. You would imagine that people who had been torn from their place in society and isolated in subhuman conditions would create very despondent art. But almost all of the plays written and performed in the Jewish ghettos were comedies. Maybe at this point in my argument, you're raising the objection that humor doesn't necessarily conflate to optimism, and that my example is ill-chosen. We tend to think of optimism and pessimism as being a matter of expectation, as in, do we expect bad things to happen, or do we expect good things to happen? But these definitions are not useful. With rare exception, what we as human beings expect of the world has little bearing on what the world gives us. A more worthwhile definition of optimism and pessimism should, in my estimation, be tethered not to what we expect to happen next, but how we react to what has already happened. An optimist sees the bright side of how things have transpired, even if that bright side is something comically absurd, as it often is. A pessimist prefers to see the negative of what has happened. Those who laugh at Nazis are true optimists. Those who call the laughter insane are true pessimists. It seems that even in the most severe circumstances, human beings can find something to laugh about. Perhaps comedy is even easier to find in such circumstances. As Robin Williams said, "For me, comedy starts as a spew, a kind of explosion. And then you sculpt it from there, if at all. It comes out of a deeper, darker side. Maybe it comes from anger, because I'm outraged by cruel absurdities, the hypocrisy that exists everywhere, even within yourself, where it's hardest to see. And while I'm quoting brilliant people to make myself seem smarter, I might as well throw a John Milton quote your way as well. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell a hell of heaven." That's from Paradise Lost, and Milton's writing there as the devil who has just been cast into hell. Satan looks around his new surroundings, hell, a place of misery and dread, and reaches the conclusion that it is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. You could liken Lucifer's situation to a young adult who moves out of his parents' house and into a shitty apartment. In almost every way, the apartment may be inferior, but at least it's a domain where he can exercise a greater degree of control and freedom without the chiding of his mom and dad. At least in his apartment, he's the boss, as long as he stays quiet enough to not upset the neighbors and as long as he can manage to pay the rent. But let's also remember the fable from Aesop about the sour grapes. It goes like this. A hungry fox spots a delicious, juicy, wonderful batch of grapes up on a high vine. With great determination, he jumps and claws and tries with all of his might to reach them, but he can't. And when it becomes clear that the grapes are simply out of his reach and that no amount of effort will deliver them into his salivating maw, he says to himself, "Those grapes are probably sour anyway." We recognize ourselves in the fox because we also tend to lie to ourselves about that which we cannot have rather than admit that we are powerless. If we can't have that which we desire, we often convince ourselves that we don't, in fact, desire it. Humor and other forms of optimism serve as a defense against the suckiness of the world, but they are obviously limited in the protection they offer. Laughter raised Jewish spirits in a time of great turmoil, but it didn't protect them from the Nazi gas chambers. No amount of positive attitude or gallows humor could prevent the Zyklon B from turning rooms full of living Jews into rooms full of Jewish corpses. Lucifer can tell himself that with enough mental effort, he can make a heaven of hell, but it doesn't change the fact that he is in hell and no longer in heaven. The fox can pretend that the unreachable grapes are sour and undesirable, but they remain juicy and delicious. Ultimately, our mental efforts to stave off the suck only dull the pain. They cannot defeat it. Well, what about the things that don't suck? Well, they are hard to find. Even the most amazing and pleasurable thing comes with a list of downsides attached to it. Take sex, for example. It is a thing that we are biologically compelled to pursue, for it's how our species reproduces, and reproduction is the closest thing that evolution has given us to a meaning or purpose. But even this primal need and primal pleasure is marred with its own set of difficulties. There is unrequited attraction, known contemporarily as the friend zone, STDs, unwanted children, sexual predators, cheating, awkward moments of failure or embarrassment, underwhelming partners, unrealistic kinks, body image issues, and a whole host of other issues that one could fill an entire book with. There's not a single aspect of life that I can think of that's 100% positive. A happy memory can make you feel sad because you're not in that moment any longer. Laughter can conceal a mountain of pain, as we've already examined a bit earlier. Even a smile can hurt your face after a while. Friends can betray you, family can disown you or control you too rigidly. Many of the best tasting foods are bad for you. Many of the decisions that gratify you in the moment will hurt you in the long run. In fairness, it's hard to think of things that are completely bad either. Even if you die a terrible death, it might at least mean your enemies are happy and your suffering is over. If your house burns down, you might get a big insurance check or the sympathy of your family and friends, or both. If you go to prison, at least some private prison company's CEO somewhere is making a little more money. At least someone somewhere wins. Why does this equation seem so drastically lopsided? For every moment of pleasure, it seems that there are many moments of pain. For every minute of exhilaration, there are hours of boredom. For every person who lives in wealth and opulence, there are countless others who struggle to make ends meet or who live in abject poverty. For every lottery winner, there are millions of lottery losers. Oh, and let's not forget that no matter how much happiness you can fit into one lifetime, ultimately, one is all you get. When you're done, you will die. No matter what path you walked, there will be countless multitudes you did not. No matter what joys you experienced, there will always be many pleasures you never explored. No matter what accomplishments you achieved, so much of your potential was never realized. You will blink out of existence, and soon enough, even from memory. Even kings are eventually forgotten. One day the human race itself will die, and the complete works of Shakespeare will be equal to the dirt of the ground. The universe doesn't value art. We do. The same can be said of all that we value. Once we're gone, it all reverts to meaninglessness. For we are the arbiters of meaning, and we are the creators of meaning, and we are the inventors of God. God exists in our minds to give our concept of meaning weight beyond itself. That which we value, we will tell ourselves that it is not we alone who value it, but it's God who values it also. And whereas we are demonstrably mortal, God is eternal. Whereas we are limited in our powers, the powers of God are boundless. Whereas we are ignorant, God is all-knowing. Whereas we cannot fathom the true nature of existence, God is the architect of all that is, was, and will be. Whereas we cannot decide what has value and meaning, God is the master of value and meaning. Whether it is to be lamented or rejoiced, God is a concoction of the human mind. Through the processes of science, mathematics, and to a lesser extent philosophy, we have come to understand that God is a failed hypothesis. Whereas we are mortal, God never lived. Whereas we are limited in our powers, God is powerless. Whereas we are ignorant, God has never thought a single thought or known a single fact. Whereas we cannot fathom the nature of existence, God has never existed. Where does that leave value and meaning? There can be no God to give weight to it. Does it therefore have no weight? In a way, we are the God we've searched for. True, we lack his immortality, his omniscience, his omnipotence, his dominion over all of existence. But from a certain point of view, we have all of those things. We may not be immortal, but as the strange philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said, if we take eternity to mean not infinite temporal duration, but timelessness, then eternal life belongs to those who live in the present. We may not be all-powerful, but we have within us the capacity to seek and expand power. We may not be all-knowing, but we are learning creatures whose knowledge has expanded over time. We may not be the creators of the universe, but each of us lives qualitatively in a universe of our own perceptual assemblage. There is a reason why John Milton's Lucifer is a sympathetic character, because like us, he aspires to be God, but finds himself instead consigned to hell. God is the ultimate pinnacle of the aspirations of man. What we hunger for, he personifies. We struggle for power and self-determination, so we imagine God as an all-powerful being whose whims are law. We yearn for understanding, so we imagine God as knowing everything there is to know. We struggle to find meaning in existence, so we imagine God as the master of meaning. Not only can he identify that which has meaning, but he is the very source of said meaning, the absolute essence of it. Without God, we must accept the limits of our power, of our knowledge, and these are bitter pills to swallow. But not the most bitter. Centuries of being taught to humble ourselves before the divine has made us somewhat willing to accept our limitations, although it was always with the consolation that we were in the hands of the Almighty. The bitterest pill to swallow is the pill of meaning, because even though every person has within them a system of values and meanings, without God there is no objective metric by which to judge such things. Therefore, we must accept that what is meaningful to us has no meaning outside of us. We are the only authors of meaning known to exist. Earlier in this chapter, we briefly mentioned and then dismissed the famed philosophical question of, what is the meaning of life? My answer was glib. There isn't one. For the sake of clarifying what I'm talking about here, let's tackle the question a little more deeply. Like most questions in the realm of subjectivity, it can be answered from many different angles and from many different distances. If we are pulled all the way back and looking at the totality of all of existence, the question, what is the meaning of life, can be interpreted to mean, look at all this life that fills the cosmos. What is the meaning of it all? And that's probably a question better left to science. The interpretation of the question that we will look at is this. In the context of this vast cosmos, this vast universe, or perhaps multiverse, what is the value of human life? If there's a God presiding over the whole thing, then perhaps the value of human life is that we're the pet project of a bored deity. But no matter how far back we pan, we don't see a God. I could make an argument that even if there were a God, he would not necessarily be able to provide us with the meaning that we hunger for, but since I don't believe that he exists, I won't bother with that argument here. Without his presence, what does human life mean in the vastness of space and the vastness of time? Well, the planet that we occupy a fraction of the surface of is one planet out of 100 billion planets in the Milky Way galaxy, which is one of 100 billion galaxies in the universe, which could be just one of 100 billion universes, for all we know. If our planet was wiped out tomorrow, the overall picture of the universe would not change in any noticeable way, nor would its continuing function be in any way impaired. The universe existed for 13.7 billion years without us, and it may exist for that long or longer after we're gone and never take note of our absence. Even if it had the capacity to notice our destruction, it would not notice it any more than you notice a single cell of bacteria dying on your arm. Human life is of no value at this distance. If we pan closer, much closer, to just the planet Earth, human life has some meaning. We've lived on the surface of the world for 2,000 centuries, and we've surely been among its most dominant species. Not only have we traversed and colonized much of the Earth's surface, but we've repurposed its resources to suit ourselves. We, like Milton's Lucifer, have done our best to make a heaven of hell. On a cold day, it can be warm inside. On a hot day, it can be cool inside. We have special chairs for the crippled and injured that allow them mobility. We have food in abundance delivered to our doorstep if we want it. We have endless entertainment options at our fingertips for a reasonable price. We have, through science and technology, made ever greater strides towards godhood. We may not be all powerful, but we can split the atom. We may not be all knowing, but we carry vast compendiums of knowledge around in our pockets. Yet strides toward meaning elude us. You cannot discover meaning via a scientific process. You cannot engineer and manufacture meaning. If anything, the greater the strides we have made towards power and knowledge, the further we have moved away from meaning. But just as Aesop's fox hungered for the unreachable grapes, we hunger for the unreachable meaning of life. So should we, like the fox, simply lie to ourselves and say, the meaning is probably sour anyway? Or should we continue to strive for meaning and hope that some miracle of effort will produce a seemingly impossible result? From the perspective of the earth, the answer to the meaning of human life is elusive. It's something we hunger for, strive for, or even convince ourselves that we have found. But if we zoom in one final time into the mind of one human being, such as yourself, we can find yet another meaning of life. To an artist, art is meaningful. To a businessman, business is meaningful. To a drug addict, their drug of choice is meaningful. To a vain person, their looks are meaningful. To a smart person, their intelligence is meaningful. Everyone has values. Even the most deplorable human beings to exist have something that they find value and meaning in. Albert Fish, the notorious sadomasochistic serial killer, believed that torturing, killing, and eating children was a divine experience that pleased the Christian God. Many Christians don't share that view of God, but they may not be as far removed as they imagine. Mother Teresa took in massive amounts of money under the auspices of helping the poor and the sick, but what she offered them was little more than an overcrowded hovel in which to suffer and die. The money she collected didn't go to medicine for the sick, but into the deep pockets of the Catholic Church. And this was justified by Teresa by her belief that there is a profound beauty in suffering that God loves. In Amsterdam, there is a famous museum called the Rijksmuseum. And there you can find an abundance of old Christian art, mostly from the 14th through 17th centuries. One thing that's very striking about Christian art is that it's all very joyless and grim, full of stern and sad faces, bloody scenes of crucifixion, decapitated heads, cripples, infanticide, and so on. The one Bible scene in the entire museum that seems remotely to be joyful is a painting of a drunken Lot about to be raped by his own daughters, and that's not exactly the happiest tale in existence. To me, these images are too joyless and barren to be of interest, but to Christians, there is something captivating in them. Like Albert Fish and Mother Teresa, many Christians see a divine beauty in suffering, and from that suffering they derive meaning. It is not difficult to understand when you remember that Christianity was born out of the imagination of an oppressed people who lived in poverty. Instead of seeking the power to escape from poverty, they created a religion that extolled poverty, that said that the meek would inherit the earth, that said that it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Christianity is truly the religion of Milton's Lucifer, for their goal is the same, to make a heaven of hell, using only the power of their minds. Nonetheless, there is a difference. Lucifer made a heaven of hell by declaring that it was better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. The Christians made a heaven of hell by convincing themselves that hell was just heaven's waiting room, and that if they accept their terrible lot in life with grace and humility, then paradise would await them in the next life. If you ask a Christian the meaning of life, they are apt to say that life is a test, a series of trials to see if your soul is worthy of joining God in heaven. You pass this test when you accept the validity of Christian mythology as fact and personally submit yourself to Jesus Christ and to his Father God. In other words, it's a game where the object is to be gullible. Now, we live in times when it's harder and harder to be gullible enough to fall for the blatant deceits of Christianity. Throughout the Western world, atheistic thought has been on the rise for decades and has exploded in the information age. The serpent in the Garden of Eden told Adam and Eve that if they ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they would be as God. And God told them something else. He told them that they would surely die if they ate the fruit. Though I see the story only as allegory, I can liken it easily to the subject matter here. The question I'd like to answer is, who was lying? Was it God or was it the devil? It seems to me that they were both lying and both telling the truth. Knowledge has brought man closer and closer to becoming his own God, but it's also disconnected him from the bliss of his ignorance. No creature but man must contend with the existential crisis, must agonize over meaning, must imagine gods to comfort him, must invent lies to shield him from the harshness of reality. The serpent of Eden was right when he said that biting from the tree of knowledge would make us like God. And the more godlike we have become, the less need we have for the God of old. But God was right as well, because in a way, we have also died. We are dying spiritually as we realize the fallacious nature of spirituality and begin to recognize that it's something that exists within us and not outside of us. We have lost our spirituality and our naivete, but we have not lost our hunger for meaning. It was a hunger that was once sated on the fruits of God, but in 1882, our good friend Friedrich Nietzsche saw that the Enlightenment had killed God. Since Nietzsche's 1882 declaration that God is dead, there have been many attempts to bring God back to life, including Jordan Peterson's most recent attempts at resuscitation. But God has not come back to life. He's only gotten deader. Like Aesop's fox, we can no longer reach the fruit. Nietzsche sought to fill the gap left by God's death with art and with culture. But art can never be for mankind what God was. Art can be criticized. Art can be taken or left. Art can be ignored. Art is the product of fallible man. And we have seen in light of the recent Me Too campaign that many artists are terribly fallible and broken human beings. Great art can be transcendent, but it's never divine. God, for mankind, was an explanation for why we suffer, but also a promise to end suffering. God was a stern father who loved us, but whose judgments were harsh. God was a force that could not be challenged, could not be trifled with, could not be disobeyed without consequence. God was a king who would reign forever, even as the kingdoms of man fell to ruin and to dust. And no matter how much modern apologists like Jordan Peterson wish for the dominion of God to once again preside over man, it's unlikely to happen. We've come too far into godhood to see God. We have climbed too high on the Tower of Babel, and we can now see that heaven is empty, that the throne of God is nowhere, and that the souls of the dead likely have no destination other than oblivion. It took us more than a century to widely accept what Nietzsche knew in 1882, that God is dead. But we have still barely begun to deal with the greatest ramification of that statement. It's not just that God is dead, it's that meaning is dead. We will never again find meaning as we found in God. We will not find it in art or in science or in any other endeavor. The reason why is simple. Meaning was always a trick of the mind. Once you know how the trick works, you cannot be fooled with it again. Happily, there are advantages to the death of meaning. Foremost, without an outwardly defined meaning, we are free to make our own meaning. This is at the core of my definition of optimistic nihilism. We are not constrained by a God that was given to us by society, but we are instead our own gods and may make determinations for ourselves. We must still exist within a social contract, but within the freedoms of society, we can choose our own destiny, or at least aim for it. If you don't find solace in that, you can at least take comfort in knowing that with the rejection of objective meaning, all that you've really lost is yet another potent delusion that was only misguiding you. Every child reaches an age where she no longer believes in Santa Claus and begins to understand that there is no magic in the world. The presents beneath the tree are not made by elves in the North Pole, but by Hasbro and Sony. The presents are not delivered by a fat immortal who commands flying reindeer, but by a pudgy UPS driver. Humanity is beginning to reach a similar age where the Santa Claus for adults, God, has been debunked as a myth, even though we still have the same presence that God gave us, a sense of spirituality and a sense of meaning. They no longer seem as magical underneath the tree. The presents are still just as present, but the context of them is no longer as exciting, no longer as dramatic and magical. So my answer to Chelsea's question is this. We are a species that is leaving the innocence of childhood and emerging into the confusion of adolescence. We are, as a species, facing an existential crisis. We are no longer naive enough to justify our own existence. We no longer believe that our suffering is a path to anything better. We no longer believe that our purpose is written in stone, and we don't yet know how to deal with that. Some say we must live for ourselves. Some say we must live for others. Some say we should not live at all. Some say we must live to create art or build empires or accrue wealth or any number of other things. Some say we must turn back to God. Some say we must reinvent God, essentially giving him a slick Hollywood reboot. This diversity of opinion is the chaos in which new ideas are born, as we discussed in Chapter 1, but they are also a clamor that is so deafening that you cannot hear yourself think sometimes. We are presented with many paths, but none are the right path because there is no right path. The challenge of our place and time is this. How do we feel the firm conviction that we have chosen the right path when we know that there is no right path? How do we stand firm in our ideals when we know that they are subjective and that they are worth no more or less than the ideals of those we absolutely despise? How do we bear the indignities and heartaches of life when we see so clearly that our suffering amounts to nothing and means nothing, that we exist not because it's the will of something greater, but that we exist simply because we exist? Everything sucks because we don't have good answers to those questions. Life has always contained its fair amount of suffering, but we once had a comforting lie to protect us from the true context of that suffering. Now that the lie is losing credibility, we have lost our shield, and just as Adam and Eve realized that they were naked before God, we have realized that we are naked in the cold cruelty of uncaring existence. This prospect can terrify us and fills us with dread. However, it can also be a gift if we see that in acceptance of meaninglessness, there is the potential to experience a freedom unlike anything we have yet experienced. Will we explore the new terrain of meaningless existence, or will we cling ever more desperately to a delusion of meaning? This is the choice we face. Which is the correct path? That's completely up to you.